Welcome to Retrospective Cinema, a podcast wherein we'll endeavor week after week to see the full filmographies of chosen directors. We'll interpret, critique, and discuss. I'm your co-host, Ryan Saylor.
And I'm your other co-host, Annie Morell. Today, we're continuing on our series about Paul Thomas Anderson with The Master, a movie that I saw for the first time earlier this year and for the second time this year now. Here's a clip.
She was that lovely girl.
I got no reason. I'm a fool.
Do you love Doris?
Yes.
Is she the love of your life?
Yes, sir.
Why aren't you with her?
I don't know.
Yes, you do. Tell me why you're not with her if you love her so much.
I told her I'd come back, and I never went back, and now I gotta get back to her.
Why don't you go back?
I don't know.
Why don't you come
I don't know!
Close your eyes.
That was from The Master. Here at Retrospective Cinema, we are completionists, so we usually check in with any short films or side projects directors make in between things. This week, there's only one thing to talk about first.
It's called Back Beyond, and we're a full spoiler podcast.
Yeah, the reason that matters this early this week is Back Beyond is entirely repurposed B-sides, is, one way to say it. Deleted scenes is another, but they're not scenes deleted probably for a mistake, anything like that. It's just that these kind of reinforced plot lines, through lines already in the movie, so they were relegated to this 20-minute featurette, which is very good. It doesn't really work on its own. Like, if you were just to watch Back Beyond without The Master, I don't think it'd be much of anything, but as reinforcement of what the film already is, I thought it was pretty cool.
Yeah, definitely just strictly a companion piece to The Master. But I really loved it. I kind of thought a couple of the scenes should have been in the movie, in my opinion. Specifically, I liked that we got to see Laura Dern's character
Do
process, do anything. And we got a little more of Amy Adams' character in this as well. Quite a bit of, I thought, the sort of romance between Dodd and Freddie, Philip Seymour Hoffman and Joaquin Phoenix's characters.
Sure. My favorite scene my favorite scene in Back Beyond, so that didn't make the cut for the film, was this discussion. It goes through a couple scenes, and it's a reinforcement of a theme that's kind of implicit to the film, so I see why it was cut, but I actually kind of liked it being spelled out. They discuss whether the line is whether a book can kill someone. And so I'm sure we'll get a lot into cults and false doctrines and people relying on that. But I thought that line was specifically interesting because, the film is all about that.
Yeah. And you kind of, it first gets brought up by Freddie. He says, "Books don't kill people, Clark," who is Rami Malek's character. And then Clark asks Dodd at dinner, "Can books kill people?" And then Dodd gives, I can't wait to talk about Dodd because I feel like I got even more out of the character on my second watch, in that I think he is a phony completely.
Yeah.
Definitely, I think that scene should have been in the movie because it's actually part of it. I can tell where the cut was made.
Right, that's the one expansion to a scene instead of a proper deleted scene.
Yes, yeah. And then I also wanted to just give a little nod to the end of the short film ends with kind of a blooper reel of one of just, you can see Philip Seymour Hoffman and Joaquin Phoenix, like, really, I would argue almost not even breaking character, but just like making each other laugh with this one line during a smoking scene where they're smoking like menthol cigarettes and trying to say minty flavor, and it's just like they're cracking each other up, and it's very endearing. It made me like the two of them even more. I don't know, do you have anything else to say on it's hard because it is so
I think
what we're about to talk about.
The other things would come up naturally throughout discussion. I guess the one other moment that I liked seeing, and I think the reason it's cut, is that the first act of the film is already maybe a little long for what it is. It's all the time where Freddie is post-war, but before he has met Lancaster Dodd, is the first 30 or so minutes of the film. Anyway, so this scene would have gone in there, but we actually get to see him, like, what he was doing when he missed his boat and all that. I did enjoy just kind of filling in that gap, but it's ultimately unnecessary. So, The Master, Paul Thomas Anderson's follow-up to There Will Be Blood, had a lot of eyes on it, obviously, because he had just made what many considered one of the greatest films of the decade, easily, of the century, probably, of all time, possibly. And it started to get further news because once people started hearing about it, it seemed to be a takedown of Scientology, which inherently would be a bit of a spicy topic. So a lot of people were, looking forward to it for a number of reasons. But since its release, it definitely has not had the staying power of something like There Will Be Blood, which I think is a shame because it is great. And I guess, spoilers for my thought. But I was curious, to start us off, why you think that might be, and then what your opinion on it compared to some of his films that have stood the test of time more.
Yeah, I mean, I think in general, I think it's interesting because The Master is really similar in a lot of ways structurally to There Will Be Blood, and it's the same kind of really dark tone, and it's about these two men and their relationship, and I'm really I wouldn't be surprised if, honestly, not the Scientology is like a huge mainstream religion at this point, but I think it is a more scandalous topic, so I can see that being maybe part of the reason why it hasn't stayed in conversation as much. I'm even more surprised, honestly, and I'm excited to hear your take because it's one of Philip Seymour Hoffman's like final roles, his final PTA role, and so you'd think that it would kind of remain in the zeitgeist a little bit longer, but I'm not really sure because I think that There Will Be Blood is better than The Master. Like, yes, absolutely, I do. I don't know. I think it's a little more perverted as a film than There Will Be Blood, and Freddie as a character is just, unnerving to watch in a very different way than the characters in There Will Be Blood. So what do you have a theory about why it hasn't stayed?
I think there's a couple things. I think The Master, I think you're right that it definitely is hornier and more off-putting in certain ways. I think also there are, even if it's as deep a film as There Will Be Blood, I think the messaging is less clear. It makes you work for it a little more, especially with what it's saying about Freddie's character and Dodd's character and their relationship. You compare that to our duo in There Will Be Blood, and I think it is a little less clear, less easy to grab onto things. So I think those are probably the main reasons. But it's pretty great. I think if you liked There Will Be Blood, you would like this one. So I don't know necessarily why one had such traction past the other, but yeah. I guess since I brought it up already, do you want to start by talking about the two of them and their similarities and differences from the last film?
Yeah. So Joaquin Phoenix plays Freddie, and he's immediately depicted as an animal, as this debaucherous creature, as he's still out to sea. You have that scene with the sand lady, which is
Yep.
coming back a few times throughout the film, and then also in the in Back Beyond, and you see him like kind of banging around coconuts, and it's very, he climbs the tree to get the coconut, he's wrestling with other men, there's the fake lady sex, so immediately he is an animal. And then our first kind of introduction to Lancaster Dodd, Philip Seymour Hoffman's character, is him on a yacht, which is like it is a very iconic symbol of wealth and like high society. Not his yacht, though he is the captain, as he says. We get this picture of, at least I did, of Dodd as this pseudo-intellectual pretty immediately. But, people see him as this evolved man who has, this master who has discovered this system to recall past lives, the memories that we supposedly all have within us, that are why man is violent, man has war, and it's the root cause of all of the world's problems. And here's Dodd saying, like, I have the answer to that. Oh, and I will say briefly, going back to Back Beyond, I don't think they mention this in the actual film, but we finally learn why or how Dodd got the idea for his first book, which was a near-death experience, which is like a pretty common, people see things when they almost die. And I think that really makes sense as an origin for him. But I was glad that I got to kind of peek behind the curtain and learn that. Yeah, so that's my initial picture. It's Dodd calling Freddy a silly animal, and immediately taking on this role of, like, I can civilize you, basically.
Right.
And seeing something in him. Maybe it's just the hooch that he brews, but the Navy hooch that Dodd loves so much. But yeah, we get this kind of the two sides of man, the civilized side of man, or ostensibly civilized, and kind of big brain man, and then the more devolved type of man in Freddy.
Yeah, it was interesting because there are some scenes where they absolutely could just be written into There Will Be Blood, or vice versa, and it would work. Like, their dynamic felt like an expansion of some of the exploration from that last film. And then there were some scenes where that absolutely wasn't the case. I think what I was talking about earlier, and we talked about this a lot last episode, both our men from There Will Be Blood kind of have the same problem, right? They're both trying to get as much as they can out of the world, and they lose their soul in the process. These two characters are exploring these themes, like you're talking about, base humanity versus, enlightened humanity, stuff like that. Everything with them together explores these themes, but they don't have the exact same goal.
The relationship between the two men in There Will Be Blood is a lot more adversarial than the relationship we see between Freddy and Dodd. And Freddy and Lancaster Dodd's relationship is at times pretty homoerotic, right. Or at least very, they're very close friends, if nothing else. And so I do think it's pretty different in that way. But I agree that because it's these two men seeking something in both cases, and seeing in each other that they're another man who is also seeking something in this world, seeking answers or seeking success, in the case of There Will Be Blood. So yeah, I do think it's interesting that PTA decided to make another movie with such a close, like, male friendship or enemyship in the case of...
Yeah, I was looking at kind of the foundation for this film, how it came to be, and part of the inspiration, or at least part of what PTA was looking at when he started out, was those early drafts of There Will Be Blood. So it makes sense that there is that similarity, because that's part of where he started. Other things that got him going at first, he was attempting to adapt Thomas Pynchon's debut novel V, which he did not, or though there's still a little bit of the text there, though I haven't read V. I kind of read a summary just to see what made it into this and didn't. And V does deal with, like, post-war PTSD, that kind of stuff, but it wasn't enough of an influence that Pynchon got a writing credit, where he absolutely will in Inherent Vice, which is a direct adaptation, and then One Bell After Another takes enough from Vineland that Pynchon is once again credited, even if it's less of a direct adaptation. Anyway, and then obviously PTA was looking at the life of L. Ron Hubbard, and we see that in a number of ways. The foundation of The Cause does kind of mirror the creation of Scientology, and especially, at least according to what I read, the scene that the most mirrors reality and got Tom Cruise upset during a private screening was seeing L. Ron Hubbard Jr.'s dismantling of his father and being like, he's making it up as he goes along, that kind of thing, because apparently that does mirror what happened in real life.
Interesting. Yeah, and of course there are the kind of more obvious surface parallels to Scientology, like the fact that they start on this big yacht. C Corp is a pretty famous piece of Scientology.
Sure.
have their like sea trips, and even the processing is similar to some
Yeah, to Dianetics.
yes, to Dianetics, exactly. I understand why Tom Cruise was upset. That was pretty cool of Paul Thomas Anderson to give him a little preview.
Yeah, but it read like PTA, didn't expect Tom Cruise to have any problems with the film, but
which wow, so crazy. I think that's maybe he was like, no, but it's good, so it won't matter to Tom Cruise that it's maybe critical of Church That Hates Being Criticized. Yeah, kind of bummed that this means definitely they'll never work together again.
Well, I don't know. I never say never. I mean, well, it seemed like they at least ended amicably, but I mean, obviously everything happened between closed doors, so we don't really know. But
I was there, actually.
Oh, there you go. Well, you have to let me know after we finish recording what was said. And then, I mean, we won't talk about it till next week, but he worked with Fiona Apple again, so who knows?
That's true. Yeah, but Fiona Apple's that saga has to do with like interpersonal drama, whereas this is more like religious institutional drama that I can see. They're pretty strict about what their followers can do, and I don't know. Who knows what that would say to the congregation? I really don't know.
I really want to, before we move on from these two, I think the big thing I wanted to ask you, because there's this culminating line in the movie where Dodd asks Freddy, if you figure a way to live without serving a master, any master, then let the rest of us know, will you? For you'd be the first person in the history of the world. And that culminates Freddy's journey from, if he's going to be using this animal metaphor, like a free dog or a tamed dog, that kind of thing. But my big question for you is, if that is what Dodd believes, who is Dodd's master?
Yeah, I would say because he is purporting to be essentially a prophet, and
but he doesn't believe what he's preaching. I mean, he can't. I maybe everyone else can view him as serving God in some way, although I don't even know that the cause proclaims, a true higher power. But he doesn't believe it. So even then, what if that were true? I don't think that's quite, and I don't think that's enough.
I mean, maybe I guess my only other theory would be Peggy, because I do think we see enough from her to know that it may be a little more behind the scenes, or a lot more behind the scenes than Dodd, but she, I think, is just as much of a leader in the cause as he is. And she has this passion. There's a scene midway through the movie where they're alone and they've just been kicked out of that party, and she's immediately upset that their cause is not being taken seriously, and she's immediately starting to scheme as to how get back at them, get back to them, whatever. So I don't know. I do think that there is a world where Peggy is his master, because also in this kind of 1950s era that we're in, especially the type of man that he is, I think it's important that he have a wife, that he have a traditional family. And I think he loses a lot of credibility without that kind of image. So did you have a theory, a take?
I think Peggy's a good answer. I mean, another scene, the only time we see Lancaster tamed, so to speak, is when she masturbates him.
The mirror scene.
And it's not sexy at all. It's very taming is a good word. He goes from being in control to absolutely not being in control.
He does exactly as she commands in that scene. He stops drinking, and I actually have a question on that, because I'm not 100% sure who she's talking about. Is she just talking about Freddy when she says, like, you need to stop, like, messing around in public? You need to stop being sloppy?
Yeah, it was an interesting moment, because I think anywhere else in the movie, I'd say yes. And that may still be what is driving her anger. But that scene happens right after this party where the film portrays everyone as naked, even though they aren't in the scene. So assuming that we interpret that scene the same way, which is just that Freddy is noting that these people are getting to their base desire even though they're pretending to be kind of high class, then she's reminding him to not act like that. But in general, yes, I mean, I think his kryptonite is Freddy.
But I think if he had been indulging to that level as well, if that's what that scene represents, then wouldn't he have also been naked? He was clothed. It was only the women.
Yeah, well, we see that scene from Freddy's point of view, so it's a little hard to tell exactly what Lancaster was doing in that moment.
Well, and that is true. And I guess I interpret it, I like your interpretation. I took it more as like, oh, it's another visual representation of how Freddy's mind works. That he is this like base animal who sees, and I think we see this a lot in every scene with a woman that Freddy has, where women are sex objects to him and really nothing more.
Okay, I don't disagree with you, but I think the root of it is this unresolved feeling of true love that he once had. So he does treat all of these women as objects, but I think it's him trying to fulfill this gap left in him from when he actually did experience, true beyond sexual desire for someone, like where he actually did have feelings of love.
I mean, so then how does that explain the behavior when he is overseas? Because he's still, like, the hope is still there with Doris at that point.
Well, yes and no. I mean, he said he was going to come back, and then he never did. I think we see often that Freddy is running from anything. Anyone that gets too attached to Freddy, he runs from. Like, obviously he's not into the cause or whatever, but he is into Dodd, and then he takes any chance he gets to get away. So I think, I think it takes him, what is it, 3 years in the story to finally be like, oh, I guess I should go back. And by then it's much too late, obviously.
Yeah.
I don't think that Freddy would, rationalize, oh, I'm doing all of this and I have all of this pent up sexual energy because I miss this one chance at love. Like, I don't think he knows any of that. I think that's what is actually happening.
Okay. Yeah. I don't disagree with you. I think both can be true. Both of our kind of initial interpretations of the nudity scene. And I think in a lot of ways it's this conflicting, the way that sex is portrayed in general, or sexuality is portrayed in general, is this conflicting thing of, like maybe women are sex objects, but sex is also power for women, as in the case of Amy Adams' Peggy. So it is, I don't know, it's complex, that's what we were talking about earlier. There's not one interpretation of so many of the themes and motifs within this film. So
yeah, well, I do have a motif that I have an interpretation on that. I was just looking at my notes right when you said that, so it was good timing. PTA, no stranger to long shots, obviously, but I think they're used in a really interesting way in this film, and I wondered if you agreed that they're being used in the way that I think they are. We get these extended shots. You picture, Freddy walking back and forth between the wall and the window, or the you blinked, start again, all that kind of stuff. We get these moments where the camera work does well to simulate kind of what this rigorous testing is like to the audience. And by the end of some of these shots, I mean, you're just like, wow, this is painful. Like, I want it to be over. And yeah, I think it does a good job of simulating what the characters are feeling, because by the time some of those shots are over, you're just so ready for it to be done, and you can understand, why the characters in the film, even if they don't really believe what's happening given, or force themselves to feel a certain way, because they want it to be over as well.
Yeah. I mean, it is ultimately all psychological torture that we see them administering, in my opinion. The window and wall exercise, and when Freddy and Clark are having their kind of back and forth, where one person has to keep eye contact while the other person says whatever they want. And of course, Dodd has informed Clark of Doris, having learned that information from a previous session with Freddy. So it's just, it is exhausting. And I think that's why on my first watch, like, I recognized that this movie is very well made, very well acted, well crafted. I didn't really care for it that much because it is just exhausting. And I think coming into it the second time, being a little more prepared for that feeling, and having gone through it the first time, I think it loses a little bit of its impact, not in a bad way. Just, knowing what's coming, I think I was braced.
Okay, well, I guess maybe that's our answer right then for, what we talked about earlier. Maybe it inherently is less accessible and thereby is going to have less of an audience.
Yeah, I think there's a good chance, because it's a brutal movie. I think the most brutal so far of this run. Going back to Lynn Ramsey, it was just kind of all pretty bleak. And PTA has such a wider range of genre within his and tone that, yeah, I think this one just, you go in, and I can imagine, like, going into this film after having seen, I think you get flamboyant performances from a couple of characters in this one, but I think there's something about There Will Be Blood that is, just a little more accessible.
You brought up Rami Malek's character. I just wanted to give a shout out to the casting of this film. We get pre-Mr. Robot Rami Malek. We get pre-Breaking Bad Jesse Plemons. Mm-hmm. So yeah, those were the two that I was just like, whoa, they managed to grab two total newbies that now are both relatively household names. But obviously you get Joaquin Phoenix, Philip Seymour Hoffman, Amy Adams. Like, it's a pretty impressive cast. Laura Dern is here. She doesn't do much, like we referred to earlier. Yeah.
And Jesse Plemons doesn't do anything really. I had forgotten that he was in the movie, and then when he came on screen, I was like, oh yay, exciting. And then he just kind of has his one real scene is when he is talking to Freddy and saying that his dad is just making it all up as he goes along. So definitely a very pivotal, important role to be playing, but so small. And the casting director killed it, because I've always thought that Jesse Plemons looks so much like Philip Seymour Hoffman.
The other thing I wanted to talk about, though, Freddy sees some sort of peace or reason in Dodd when he's searching. Well, he's on the run at that point for, like, murder. Mm-hmm. He gets given this, like, golden gift where he can stay on and work and live well and everything. And then from there, I mean, because he is kind of our insert for a dog, I think is the most reasonable comparison. It makes sense that he has loyalty and wants to serve his master, as the title says. My question for you, and I have my own conclusions, I think, but what does Dodd equally see in Freddy? Because it seems to be equal, and Dodd is getting much less out of Freddy, and everyone involved with Dodd is like, you need to let this man go, but he can't. And so what do you think all that boils down to?
I think there's a certain jealousy that can come from seeing someone who is kind of base and animalistic. You have an urge, and you try to fulfill that urge, and that's very satisfying. And so I think that in and of itself is pretty enticing to Dodd, to see a man living like that. He doesn't want to change him, and maybe it's also just like, oh, if I can train up this dog, then I can do anything. You find a case like that, a case like Freddy, maybe even that, if in the beginning at least, I think there's a point where he realizes he can't actually tame Freddy, and maybe we can talk about that. But I think in the beginning, it's definitely a transactional relationship in many ways. But I do think, I think especially having watched Back Beyond now, there is a kind of romance between these two men. He's drawn to him in a way, there's a lot of physical touching between them, and Dodd gets to immediately know a lot of what makes Freddy tick when they do the initial processing where Freddy talks about Doris. Yeah, I don't know, what you have a theory? What is it?
I mean, I was smiling this whole time. Yeah, we're in total agreement.
Yeah.
I think it's a combination of everything you talked about. I think yes, there is this challenge in Freddy. I think the Dodd wants him to be this poster child, like look who this man was and look how fulfilled he is now. But pretty quickly, Dodd is intelligent. He's able to see, like, there's no way. But then, yeah, going back to that scene that I read where everyone appears naked, where I read it as Dodd wanting to engage in more base desires. Yeah, I think Freddy appeals to him in that this is a life that he can't partake in anymore, that, you know, he has to be this very professional, upstanding figure, and sometimes he doesn't want to be. I think that through line goes all the way to the end of the film, that final line, which could be read as, you know, just in the moment, small nothingness, but Freddy's having sex, just hooking up again, like this isn't a person he's caring about in any way, and they're talking for a bit, and then he says, oh, it slipped out, stick it back in. And I think that kind of does sum up the movie. Like, Freddy keeps trying to be this thing that he's not, but ultimately he can't contain himself. He's going to have sex. He's going to engage in his, you know, raw humanity, because that's who he is.
Yeah. I mean, and that final scene when they're in England together really is kind of in the same way that at the end of There Will Be Blood, spoiler alert, we get this.
Yeah, in case you've just clicked this one.
Yeah, that would be very funny. Who are you? Tell us about yourself. In the case of There Will Be Blood, the movie has this definite answer as to who wins at the end. The winner being Daniel Day-Lewis's character, because he kills Paul Dano. And in this one, I think that is the answer, where maybe Dodd is able to get Freddy to come to England one more time, but it's this kind of it's very different in a way than the ending of There Will Be Blood, because it is this kind of mutual agreement that, like, no, this is not going to happen anymore. Like, this is not working. You're going to be who you are, and I can't change it. So I did, yeah, the ending really spoke to me this time. And on the subject of the ending, and we can obviously jump back, because Dodd keeps saying a couple times throughout the movie that, like, oh, I need to figure out where I've seen you before. And at a certain point, you kind of realize that he's talking about a past life.
Right.
That he's,
he says they were, like, soldiers together in Prussia, I think, is what he comes to.
Which, wow, I just want to say again, I think he's intelligent. I also think he's such a phony intellectual. And so many of the, like, pieces of wisdom that Dodd gives to his followers throughout it's just vapid platitudes.
And he's super insecure about that being found out. Like, anytime he's really challenged, he just so shuts down.
Yes. Well, I guess first then on that note, we can talk about the skeptic, because
well, finish your thought, but then we'll come back to that, because it's great.
Yeah, so in the final scene, Freddy says, in my dream you said you figured out where we met, which I thought was interesting, because Dodd said over the phone at the movie theater, hey, I figured out where we met, come to England. But Freddy says, in my dream you said you figured out where we met. So I guess my question to you is, did Freddy dream the movie theater? Because he also has, you know, the movie theater attendant brings him this phone because it's the 50s, and one of the first things Freddy says is, how did you find me? And yeah, it's true. Like, how would he have found him in this random movie theater? He disappeared.
That's great. No, I didn't catch that, but I think you're right then, that so he probably was really at this movie theater, but he starts the scene asleep, so then everything that transpires, him being brought the phone, all of that, that could easily be a dream. I like that.
Yeah, and at the same time, it could easily have not been a dream, and Freddy is just so broken between the PTSD and Dodd's meddling of his psyche that he can't really discern reality. But yeah, I think there are so many little things. There's a lot in this movie, and I do wish and hope that people continue to see it, because there's a lot to be found in a rewatch of it already.
And that's an element that we haven't talked about much, and maybe because it's not super prominent in the film, but it is a whole piece of Freddy's character, is that he is suffering from PTSD, and he was in the war as a veteran. And yeah, that the film is inherently saying that he's vulnerable, and people with mental disability are vulnerable to things like cults.
Yeah, and we get a really good picture right at the beginning of why he goes to this or even entertains the idea of joining this cult, because we see very quickly that he is not fit for society. You know, he can't work as a photographer. That's his first job, and he gets fired from that for being violent, and then he kills that farm worker with his moonshine, with the worst Long Island iced tea ever made.
Paint thinner. One part paint thinner.
And he uses a big loaf of French bread as a filter of some kind.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, so bad.
I have a lot of questions about that. But yeah, you know, we see him fired from several jobs, and we see him not able to have a normal dating life with the woman from the department store that he goes on a date with, and there's this brief shot of them. He's just like passed out, and she's eating at their like dinner date together. So it really is like well justified within the film why this man, you know, already PTSD, not only making him very susceptible to a cult like this, but just society not being able to exist in normal society, and then finding a group that is going to take him with all his faults. So I totally get it. And I think, you know, he's such an interesting character because I was so sympathetic to him that you almost forget that he is also just like, yeah, a true sex pest, in my opinion. You know, I think even though the relationship with Doris is portrayed as very sweet, and that he is waiting for her, it still comes off as full grooming to me.
It's a little hard to tell. Do you know in the film if they actually give us the exact ages? Because I was a little confused on that, because we have Joaquin Phoenix obviously not looking like a teenager in those flashback scenes, but I also couldn't tell if that was just that Joaquin Phoenix doesn't look like a teenager.
Yeah, I don't think he was supposed to be I think he was supposed to be an adult the entire time that we saw him, because him with her, because we see them talking about how he'll wait, and like he wants to be able to like be out in public with her, and at one point too they do talk about he asks her like, what, like, oh, are you a senior? And she says no. And like, junior? And she says no. Like, and he goes like, don't tell me you're a freshman. And she's like, no, I'm a sophomore. So
okay.
yeah, pretty young.
My bad. Yeah, I think because I had just immediately thought that Joaquin Phoenix was supposed to be a teenager that just didn't look like one, I kind of missed that whole element.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, but it is very, like, that's the only, we don't get any outside input on their relationship, really. Because even her mother, when he goes after too long to try to look her up, is very sympathetic to him.
Right.
And you know, who knows what the backstory to that is, if it's just that she knows that he has the capability to get violent with her. I have no idea. But yeah, I do think that it's easy to miss that, because I don't think there's a lot of like outside input, outside eyes on the nature of this relationship between Doris and Freddie. But I want to go back to something that we referenced earlier about Dodd, when he and his cause are questioned and how he reacts to that, because we have this great scene where the high up members of the cause are invited to this woman's mansion, the woman whose yacht they used, I think. And you know, it seems like Dodd is a part of high society, and he's sort of describing the cause and his sort of scientific approach to unlocking people's past lives. And there's this man in this big crowd in this living room. It's such a, like, I love this actor's performance. The only other thing I've seen him in is Silicon Valley, and he's such an odd duck, and he's so perfectly cast in this, because he's just like, excuse me like,
yeah, he's gonna heckle and totally try to debunk this whole thing, but he goes about it politely.
He's so meek. Yeah, and Dodd really tries to ignore him really until he can't any longer, and they have this whole back and forth where Dodd remains pretty civil, but guarded about and sure of himself. He's saying these things, these truths, like the ridiculous claim that like it's something like we've been around for 3 trillion years or something like that, and of course the man's like, what? That's crazy. And he's like, no, it is a scientific fact, sir. And then it kind of culminates in this blow up where we see maybe Dodd's animalistic side that is still definitely there under the surface, where he says, if you already know the answers to the questions that you ask, why do you ask, pig fuck? And that gets them kicked out because he's not actually really someone who belongs in the he's an oddity. He doesn't belong in this high society sort of environment any more than Freddy does.
Yeah, I mean we get that in one of the great scenes of the film, this jail sequence where the bars in between their cells, like it's not a wall in between their cells, it's still like bars, and so they can see each other. And the camera mostly sits outside, and so you kind of they are two sides of the same coin. Like they're arrested for the same thing. Eventually it becomes the shouting match where they're both unable to do anything except just yell at each other. But before they give into that, like you see Freddy kind of pacing around. He smashes the toilet, which there's actually a funny aside I read on the trivia section of IMDb that they filmed in a historical setting and that was not supposed to happen. He smashed a real toilet.
You got there before me. Yeah, I saw that too. Very on brand for Joaquin Phoenix.
You know, but during that whole time that Freddy's beating his head against the bunk bed and smashing this toilet, Lancaster is just standing there. But ultimately, they end up doing the same thing. So I think that really represents what you're talking about.
Yeah. And I think he even goes so far at a certain point when he finally does release the second book to compromise his own purported beliefs, his own religion that he set up for his followers by changing in the instructions for and this is kind of Laura Dern's maybe one real scene. He changes the wording of the instructions for processing from can you recall to can you imagine. So he's trying desperately for wider societal acceptance, and he is willing to sacrifice whatever to get there.
I agree, but I don't even know if I would have said that he's like compromising anything, because I think to him it is all just nothingness.
So you think he doesn't believe anything that he's preaching?
No, I don't think so.
Huh. Then why? Why not preach something that's a little more accessible? Or what is his end goal to you?
Well, we don't see anything prior to Lancaster already being the master. So I don't know that we get to see what he was before and why he latched onto this. But I'd say it's just especially because I was viewing this as a bit of a sister film to There Will Be Blood, I think it is just about accumulating power, accumulating what the world can give you, whether that's wealth, whether that's people that are at your beck and call.
Okay.
The one trade-off on that I was going to ask, Lancaster Dodd, if he is going to mirror a character from There Will Be Blood, it's Eli, but obviously they're still pretty different. But in There Will Be Blood, we kind of saw that even if Eli was evil, he still did help other people. Like we get to see Bandy in that movie, for example, be kind of a good person, and probably from being a good Christian, despite his pastor being morally bankrupt. In this film, we don't see that as much. We kind of see that everyone has bought into this lie and that it's made everyone's lives worse. So I guess, I don't necessarily have an answer that I'm looking for or anything, but I wondered, do you think There Will Be Blood is closer to PTA's own opinion? Do you think this is closer to his opinion? Or if they're both his opinion, why is that difference here? Is it just that one is mirroring Christianity and one Scientology, or what do you think that comes down to?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's I think my guess is that PTA does see that there's a difference between Christianity and Scientology. I think that's definitely at play. And I think it's a lot easier in the mainstream to get away with a very critical takedown of Scientology, which is I really do think what we get here. And I think it's, I don't know. I mean, I think it is all about like what the individual does with that kind of. I think I guess there's a power in, you know, in religion in general. And we talked a little bit about is it the system or is it the individual in the There Will Be Blood episode. And I think, again, it's the same kind of question, but I think maybe the answer in The Master is that it's the system. The system is flawed from the ground up in the case of Scientology. And maybe, you know, PTA sees a lot more virtue or possibility of virtue in Christianity and its teachings, and knowing that he's a Catholic too, I'm sure that he has like very conflicted, or was a Catholic, was raised Catholic,
Right.
At least I think that tells me that he probably has a complicated relationship with Christian values and Christianity. Yeah, I think that's where I land on it.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting because, you know, if I had either of these films individually from a director, you know, if I had There Will Be Blood by itself in a vacuum, I would say that, you know, the director views religion as, or at least like faith, as good, but can be corrupted by people that want to corrupt it. Or if I had just The Master, I would say that the director views, you know, the idea of the people at the heads of this are manipulating susceptible individuals into, this life that they can control them in. But since I have them both, I kind of land where you're landing, where it must just be that PTA, and granted, you know, I am a Christian, so, you know, that makes me biased, but sure. just in analyzing, you know, kind of what he thought, I thought was interesting that implicitly he's saying, that there was a path to virtue in the last film, and then this one he kind of seems to be saying that there isn't.
Yeah, I agree with you there. I want to talk briefly about the very end scene, because it's not Dodd and Freddie's goodbye is not the very end scene, and I guess talk about that too, because it's a very bizarre, their final goodbye is Dodd singing a love song to Freddie. It's a straight up love song, and it's this very kind of moving, sad, quiet moment where I think, if you had any doubt as to the nature of their relationship, I think it is a romantic one. And it's this sad moment where it seems like maybe Freddie has waited both too long for Doris and too long for Lancaster. So then Freddie goes back to his old ways, his animal practices, by finding this woman in England to have sex with. But he does some processing with her, and I was wondering what your interpretation of that is.
I think in the moment I just kind of read it as him, you know, trying from the other side, seeing what that side of life, you know, to him he's only seen quote unquote high society in the cause, and so he's, you know, trying it for a moment. I guess that that stays my interpretation, because then we get that final line of the stick it back in, like he, you know, tried for a moment and then decided not to engage in that.
Yeah. I feel similarly. I feel like it's seeing what the power feels like, what it feels like to have the control, and that it has changed. Like, even though I took it to mean that even though, you know, he may be going back to what he was doing before, to how he was acting before, he's going to be changed in some way because of this experience. He's not the same person that he was before meeting Lancaster Dodd, and he never will be, which I think is, you know, again, a kind of like weird, sad love story between those two characters. Very, very twisted relationship, of course.
Yeah.
But
well, they're both lying to each other all the time, so maybe it evens out.
Yeah.
No,
True.
I don't know, but that, you know, every word that comes out of Freddie's mouth, even down to like how he makes his drinks, is not true, and Lancaster is so untrue. I mean, maybe the way they would have found love is just being honest with each other for one moment. Yeah, from Dodd's perspective, I wonder if he's married, so, but I feel like you were saying, has this character to play, so I don't think he would in the 50s be willing to get with a man anyway. But then I don't know that Freddy knows that he has these feelings, so I think it's two ships passing in the night. But I don't know that the relationship would be good for either of them.
No. I think it is. It would be a very destructive relationship if they were to actually pursue that.
Yeah, we somehow missed this last week, but maybe it was just because we both so obviously loved the film. But would you recommend The Master?
Yeah, absolutely. Especially, as you were saying, excellent companion to There Will Be Blood. Wouldn't really recommend doing a double feature because you're going to be exhausted. But yeah, of course. Would you recommend the film?
Yeah, I saw it. I don't know when I first saw it, but just in my head, it's kind of grown on me since then as I've reflected on what the movie is. And then this time really locked it in as like, yeah, I love this thing. We didn't even talk about this, but it is so beautiful to look at. The color grading might be the best in PTA's filmography. The blues are so blue.
Oh, all the ocean shots. Yeah.
Yeah. But past that, yeah, it's deep, it's complex. We talked about everything on here from, religion to PTSD to suppressed feelings and love and all kinds of things. So I'm sure another viewing would get that much more out of it. And if you have seen it before, I encourage you to go back for it.
Plus, I mean, geez, there are a finite number of Philip Seymour Hoffman performances to see, and this is definitely one of them to catch if you're at all a fan of his.
And it's a starring one. So, I mean, he's so
yeah.
often he played like a smaller part within a film, but yeah, this is him.
Yeah, and he kills it. He knocks it out of the park.
Well, if you agree or disagree with our thoughts, or you have your own, feel free to write to us. We have an email, retrospectivecinemapodcast@gmail.com. You can find us on Instagram at retro_sin, CIN. TikTok's the same handle, where we're talking about some modern films. We also are on Letterboxd. Respectively, I'm at Ryan Loves Film.
And I'm at Annie Morel. Check out my horribly backlogged diary on there.
Please reach out to any or all of those. We may use your comment in a future episode. Next week, a real doozy, at least from analysis perspective, we have Inherent Vice. This is PTA's one proper adaptation. Obviously, There Will Be Bloods from Oil, but this one's very close to the book from what I understand. And we will dive into that strange drug-fueled neo-noir next time.
Can't wait. I also am kind of fearful of it, but in the meantime, happy watching.